I arrived 10 minutes early, but it still felt like I was a century too late. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary was being held at an Italian stop restaurant on the top floor of the Fairmont Hotel in San Diego. From a distance, it looked like a carefully polished painting. Sparkling, perfect, and absolutely not meant for me. It took me 3 weeks to choose the pearl-colored silk dress, and another 2 hours to convince myself that coming here was a mature decision, that I wasn't here to reopen old wounds, but to prove I had the strength to accept everything, even my family's indifference. The restaurant lobby was coated in a delicate mist of elegant silence. The server smiled politely, speaking so softly I had to tilt my head to hear him clearly. Everything was designed not to disturb anyone, including me. I walked into the banquet room, where crystal chandeliers hung like reminders to mind your manners. Most of the guests had arrived. The first eyes I met were Savannah's, my sister. She turned to look at me as if spotting a vague acquaintance at the airport. "Oh, you made it," Savannah said, lips curled in a polite smile but her eyes completely blank. She wore a deep red Ellie Saab dress, soft curls in her hair, dark crimson nails, so polished she could have been mistaken for a politician mid-campaign. Savannah always knew how to shine, even when surrounded by a crowd already applauding her. My mother hugged me, a brief touch with cold arms and perfume that clung too heavily. "You look fine," she said, her tone barely disguising the awkwardness. My father didn't hug me. He simply gave a nod, like he might to a familiar barista at Starbucks. "Rose," he said plainly, then turned away. I was seated at the end of the table, next to a white orchid centerpiece, and across from my cousin's fiancé, who had introduced himself 3 times but still called me Ruth. No one asked how I was doing. No one mentioned the art project I'd just completed, or the fact that I was recently selected as a communications advisor for a nonprofit in San Francisco. Every conversation revolved around Savannah. The conference she spoke at, the article that made the front page, the partnership offer from a luxury cosmetics brand. I smiled politely, gripping my glass of water tightly. I hadn't come to compete. I came for one reason alone: to deliver the envelope I had prepared long ago. A small gift, a gesture of peace, a way of saying, "I still hope this can be repaired." The envelope rested inside my purse, its edges softened from being touched too often. It wasn't just money. It was what little gratitude remained, even after being extinguished time and time again. I sat there, surrounded by polite laughter and the soft clink of cutlery against porcelain. It felt like dining in a stranger's home, with a nameplate bearing my name in front of me. Dinner dragged on like a symphony with no climax. People laughed at the right moments, sipped wine on cue, and fell silent where silence was expected. I nearly believed I might make it through the evening without swallowing one more ounce of hurt. Until Savannah stood up. She raised a glass of red wine, her smile soft and warm as if the restaurant's golden lights existed solely to illuminate her face. "I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight," she began, her voice gentle but carrying. "But especially, I want to thank the 2 most important people in my life." All eyes turned toward my parents. Daniel and Linda Monroe, seated center stage, as though arranged for a family magazine spread. They raised me with all the love, patience, and trust a child could ever hope for. Because of them, I've become a strong, successful, and well-loved woman. And then came the next sentence, falling onto the table like a pebble into a lake once thought still. I'm truly grateful to have been their only child. A few soft chuckles trickled out. Someone nodded, assuming it was just a charming joke. But no one corrected her. No one said my name. My father clinked glasses with my mother. My mother gave a soft laugh and touched Savannah's raised hand. As if what she said was true. As if I'd never existed. I didn't speak. I just stared at the white plate in front of me where the now cold risotto sat quietly. Just like me in this room. My heart didn't race, it didn't shatter, it simply stilled, a silence thick as the last breath of hope. I wasn't naive enough to expect praise or a toast in my name, but I didn't think I would be erased in public like that. I waited for a blink from my mother, a cough from my father, a clumsy save from Savannah. But all I got was pure, deliberate silence. They had chosen comfort, simplicity, a version of life without me in it. I inhaled, raised my head. The room remained the same. Serene, complete, with no space for someone like me. And maybe that's how they preferred it. I didn't leave my seat. I just sat there, fully awake, as if I had finally woken from a 34-year-long dream. That was the moment I knew. The envelope in my purse would never reach the people I once thought of as my parents, because they had already made their choice. I hadn't planned anything after Savannah's words. But when my mother raised her glass and my father smiled like he'd just heard the most beautiful toast of the night, something inside me slipped off the rails. I rose from my seat. No warning, no wait for my turn, no need for a polite next speaker. The chair behind me slid back silently as I moved around the long white cloth table, passing by eyes that blinked like faulty camera shutters. I heard scattered whispers, subtle shifting, forks and knives frozen midair. I opened my bag and pulled out the silver gray envelope, its edges slightly creased. Then I walked straight to the table in the corner, where Aunt Emily and Uncle Robert were sitting. They weren't the center of attention. No one was raising a glass for them. No spotlight. But they had always been present in my life, in ways my own parents never had. Aunt Emily looked up at me, surprised, as I stopped in front of their table. Her brown eyes blinked gently, while Uncle Robert set his wine glass down, sitting up as if his name had just been called. I didn't need a microphone. I didn't tap a glass. My voice carried clearly enough for the entire room to hear, yet it was soft, never sharp. I have a gift, I said. A thank you for those who raised me with quiet kindness and patience. The main table shifted. A soft throat clearing from my mother, and a frozen stare from Savannah. I handed the envelope to Aunt Emily. Just a light placement in her palm, along with the words, "This is for the two of you, thank you. For everything." The room fell silent. No clinking silverware, no awkward recovery laughter. Just an empty space, stretched thin by something everyone understood, but no one dared to name. Savannah looked at me like I had ruined her perfectly choreographed performance. My mother tilted her head slightly, a familiar gesture she used when convincing herself something wasn't inconvenient. My father, his jaw tightened. No blinking. No expression. I returned to my seat as if I had simply gone to refill my water. No explanation. No justification. The atmosphere felt like that moment right after a lightning strike, when no one has reacted yet, unsure if it was real, not knowing whether to run or stay frozen. Across the room, Aunt Emily hadn't opened the envelope. She was still staring at it like it held something fragile yet seismic. Uncle Robert gently rested his hand on her shoulder, saying nothing. That simple gesture made my eyes sting. Back at the main table, someone tried to restart the conversation with an awkward question about dessert, but no one answered. The dinner had lost all its flavor, because at its center, it no longer held family warmth, but a crack too visible to hide. I used to believe that if I tried hard enough, I could be loved the way my parents loved Savannah. I used to think I could soften my mother's disapproving gaze, or make my father stop frowning every time I said something that didn't meet his expectations. But the older I got, the more I realized comparison wasn't just an occasional feeling. It was the foundation of the house I grew up in. Savannah was always the shining gem. When she missed a step in her school performance, our parents still stood up and clapped like they were watching ballet at Lincoln Center. When I won second place in a statewide writing competition in 9th grade, my mother only said, "What's the point of writing? Why don't you try math? It's more useful." I remember having a high fever the night before my 12th birthday. I lay curled up on the sofa, trembling, while my mother focused on preparing a 3-tier cake for Savannah's party. When I whispered that my head hurt too much to bear, she just turned and said, "You have to learn to endure, Rose. You can't always be weak." But when Savannah had a mild cold, she got 3 days off school, hot chicken soup, a new blanket, and a teddy bear from a fancy toy store. I used to think I was too sensitive, like my mother always said, that maybe I imagined it all. But then I started holding on to the details. Every glance, every quiet dismissal, as a way to prove to myself that the pain was real. Like when I got a perfect score on a biology test. I brought the paper home, thrilled, hoping for a compliment, but my father just glanced at it and said, "If you're that good, might as well be a doctor. Do you even know what you want to be yet?" When Savannah received a scholarship to a prestigious private school, the family threw a celebration. When I got a full scholarship to study communication design, a field they didn't care about, my mother only asked, "Is that something you can actually make a living from?" One summer night in Santa Cruz, I had a severe stomachache. My parents were watching a movie in the hotel room. I remember sitting curled up in the bathroom, drenched in cold sweat, calling for my mom 3 times before she walked in, looked at me for a moment, and said, "You're always overreacting. Go to sleep. It'll be fine in the morning." But not everyone turned away. Aunt Emily and Uncle Robert, they never loudly defended me in front of my parents, but they quietly did what no one else ever had. They cared for me in small, consistent ways. I remember when I was little, they invited me to spend a week every summer at their home in Napa. They didn't have kids, but the guest room was always ready. Fresh sheets, a new sketchbook, a few hand-picked picture books, not for any special occasion, just because I was coming. When I told them what happened at home, they didn't interrupt or mock me. Aunt Emily would often just touch my hand and whisper, "I hear you, sweetheart. Let it pass." When I failed my first SAT practice test, my mom called it shameful, but Uncle Robert drove more than 3 hours just to take me on a walk by Clear Lake and told me about the time he lost his job at 28. Everyone stumbles, but you don't get left behind because of one fall. When I moved into my own place at 24, it wasn't my mother who called to check if I was okay. It was my aunt. She called every week, not to pressure me, just to ask, "Have you eaten breakfast?" And when I lied and said I was fine, she didn't argue. She just sent a fruit basket to my office the next day with a handwritten note. "To the strong woman I always believe in." I don't remember the exact moment I stopped hoping for love from my parents. Maybe it was when I realized I no longer shared anything new with them, because I couldn't bear their cold responses. Or maybe it was the day I walked out after another endless argument, and no one called me back. But I remember clearly the moment I sat in Aunt Emily's kitchen a few weeks before the anniversary dinner, holding a cup of coffee, listening to Uncle Robert talk about the time he accidentally burned the pancakes. Aunt Emily laughed and said, "Can't you ever keep the heat low?" And I just sat there, quietly smiling. And for a moment, I felt peace. Aunt Emily didn't open the envelope that night. I know because the next morning, while I was making coffee, I received a message from her, just a single question mark. No exclamation points, no emojis, no polite thank you phrases. Just one character, as if she still couldn't believe what had happened the night before. I waited another hour, then called. They put me on speaker. I heard Aunt Emily exhale softly before she spoke. "We haven't opened it yet, you know that." I smiled, even though no one could see. "You can now." Uncle Robert gave a short snort. "Are you sure? We don't want to overstep." "You never have," I replied. "You're not now." There was the sound of rustling paper. A pause. Then. Not a gasp, not a choked-up thank you. Just silence. A dense kind, like the two of them were staring at something too overwhelming to believe. I had transferred $50,000 into their joint account, a gift with no conditions, no notes, no strings. A thank you that no longer needed words. Aunt Emily broke the silence first. Her voice trembled like she might cry. Rose? No. No way. This isn't right. It is, I said. It's for you both. But you meant to give this to your parents, didn't you? Uncle Robert asked slowly, like each word had to walk over broken glass. I paused, then answered truthfully, I did. And just like the night before, no further explanation was needed. Aunt Emily only whispered, we didn't do anything to deserve this, sweetheart. You didn't have to. You did what my parents never did, I replied. You saw me. That's enough. I thought that would be the quiet ending. That afternoon, my mother called. I didn't pick up. 5 minutes later, a voicemail. I played it out loud while folding laundry, and her voice cut through the air, like cold metal on tile. Rose, that's enough. What is this performance? Call me back. I didn't respond. The second call came from Savannah. I ignored it too. She sent a follow-up text instead. Really? Gave them $50K? Did they raise you? Or is this your final act to prove you're the bigger person? I didn't reply, but I laughed. A single dry, short laugh, as if all the masks had finally dropped. 2 days later, social media started buzzing. Savannah posted an old photo on Instagram. Our parents on their wedding day. With the caption, real family doesn't need grand gestures. They show up quietly, with love. Always. The comments underneath read like a coordinated script. Savannah, you've always been the light of the family. Some people only show up when the spotlight's on them. Family isn't a blank check. I scrolled through them all with a calm heart. But then something else happened. Aunt Emily called, her voice slightly panicked. Sweetheart, we got an email. Anonymous. I already knew. The email contained screenshots of old messages I'd sent. Silly complaints, venting during low moments, frustration typed out in private. Things like, I wish they'd stop calling all the time. Sometimes I just want a vacation without anyone asking how I'm doing. The kind of things any human might say when feeling overwhelmed. But when extracted and sent with malice, they became ammunition. No signature, but the email came from an account used only to create fake social profiles. I knew exactly who was behind it. I wasn't angry, but a chill settled over me. Aunt Emily simply said, I know you didn't mean it, but reading them still hurt. I didn't need to defend myself. That evening, I drove to their house. In my hands was a box of coconut wafer cookies and an apology I knew they didn't require, but I still needed to say. I arrived at Aunt Emily and Uncle Robert's on a gray Saturday afternoon. The clouds hung heavy, like even the weather sensed I was carrying something unspoken. No call ahead, no flowers, just a box of cookies and my heart. Trembling. Aunt Emily opened the door. She wore the same pale blue sweater she always wore on weekends, her hair loosely twisted at the nape. When she saw me, she paused for half a second. Not out of surprise, but because she already knew I'd come. Come in, Rose, she said, her voice still warm as always, though something trembled beneath it. I followed her into the kitchen. Uncle Robert was making coffee. He looked up and smiled. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't ask what happened. He just poured an extra cup and placed it on the table. Almond milk, low sugar, right? I set the cookie box on the table. I just brought a little something. Nothing big. Aunt Emily looked at me, her eyes deep and quiet. You brought more than you think. I sat down, gripping the coffee cup like its warmth might anchor me. After a moment, I spoke. I came to apologize. For those messages. For anything that might have hurt you. Aunt Emily didn't react right away. She simply picked up a cookie from the box, broke it in half, and placed one half into my hand, just like she used to when I was little. You're human, she said, gently but firmly. Not a machine. You're allowed to be tired, to sigh, to say things you don't mean to keep. I lowered my head. But they're using those things to smear me and dragging you both into it. Uncle Robert sat down beside me. You didn't drag anyone into anything. You just brought light to a place that's been in the dark for far too long. I looked at them, two people not tied to me by blood, not obligated to care, with no responsibilities toward me, yet they were the only ones who had ever welcomed me unconditionally. Since I was little, I said, I always felt like I had to do something to be loved. Be good, be smart, be quiet, but you never asked for anything. Aunt Emily gave a soft laugh. You didn't have to do anything. You showed up. That's all we ever asked. I felt my throat tighten, not from tears, but because for the first time in days, I didn't feel like I had to defend myself. You don't owe any explanations, Uncle Robert said. And don't apologize for feeling fragile. We've all been there. The weight inside me began to lift, little by little, like someone was gently taking off the stones I had carried on my back for years. We ate cookies, drank coffee, and talked about simple things. Aunt Emily's garden was starting to bloom, Uncle Robert had burned toast for the third time that week, and the stray cat in the backyard had finally let them pet it. There were no empty words of encouragement, no everything will be okay cliches. Just quiet presence. Genuine, steady love. That night, driving home, I didn't think about what my mother and Savannah were posting online. I let the unanswered calls fade from my mind, along with the need to explain myself to anyone. I thought about Aunt Emily's hand resting on mine in the kitchen, the perfectly made cup of coffee, the peaceful silence that didn't need to be filled. I had spent so long defending myself in every room I walked into. But today, I didn't have to. And maybe that alone was enough. A week after that morning in Aunt Emily and Uncle Robert's sunlit kitchen, I wrote a letter by hand. Not to blame, not to explain what had happened, just to draw a boundary. I wrote it in my own familiar handwriting, on the thick cream paper I usually used for New Year's cards to clients. The first sentence had taken me days to finalize. Please don't contact me again. I didn't explain why. I didn't offer reconciliation. I listed it clearly. No calls, no texts, no messages passed through relatives, no attempts to rewrite the story in a way that painted me as ungrateful. I wasn't bitter, but I wasn't going to let them misunderstand either. I'm no longer playing the part you wrote for me. I wish you peace, but I will move forward without carrying anything from behind. I signed my name, folded the letter into thirds, slid it into an envelope, mailed it with delivery confirmation. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. It was my mother. Her voice began with the familiar sob, the kind that usually preceded accusations. Are you really doing this? You're tearing the whole family apart. Do you know how long your father hasn't slept over this? Are you happy now? I let her voice fade into silence. I had nothing left to say. A few days later, Savannah posted on Facebook a quote from some book, accompanied by a photo of a hand resting on an unseen shoulder. The caption read like something out of a scripted family drama. Real family never lets money stand between love. But in the end, everyone shows who they really are when there's nothing left to take. The comments were tightly curated, all full of sympathy, support, and praise for my sister's strength and selflessness. I stayed silent until Aunt Emily called me on a Monday morning. You won't believe what just happened, Aunt Emily said, her voice dry. Your parents, they sent a legal letter. I shot up from my chair. What did it say? And that we have no right to accept such a large sum from their daughter, that there are signs of psychological manipulation and asset exploitation. I didn't know whether to laugh or be furious. Minimum. What are you going to do? Uncle Robert picked up the phone. His voice was calm, tearily so. We're not going to do anything. We met with a lawyer just to be sure. No one has the right to reclaim a gift that was given freely. No conditions, no coercion. But if they keep pushing, Then they're only exposing their own greed, he said. I bit my lip. I don't want you to get dragged into this. Aunt Emily cut in, her voice soft but firm. Rose, we don't take money from strangers, but gifts from family? We accept those with open hearts. I had no words left. Eventually, my mother sent another letter. Handwritten, 3 pages long. A tangle of pleading, blame, veiled threats, and ending with a line cold as steel. If you continue to deny your own blood, don't be surprised when no one considers you family anymore. I folded the letter and didn't read it again. I didn't need them to see me as family. This home didn't ask me to be anything but present. That was enough. Didn't need to prove anything, and certainly didn't have to stay silent in order to be loved. That Christmas was the first time I didn't get a message from my mother. No invitation, no greeting, no come home, sweetheart. Just a cold absence where blood and expectations used to hold something together. And strangely, I felt more relief than sadness. I spent the holiday in Sonoma, in the little gray-roofed house where Aunt Emily and Uncle Robert had lived for nearly 20 years. There was no 10-foot Christmas tree, no blinding porch lights, just a simple wreath on the door, a small crackling fireplace, and the faint scent of cinnamon cookies floating through the air. We didn't throw a big party. No friends, no guests, no one there to judge the meal or compare gifts. Just 3 people. 1 old wooden table, a roast chicken with potatoes and green salad, and mugs of slightly burnt hot cocoa. Still sweet, still imperfect, just like Uncle Robert always overdoes the cocoa powder. Aunt Emily gave me a hand-knitted scarf, dark chestnut with thin, looping threads that looked like wind stitched into fabric. I knew she'd been making it for weeks, slowly, night by night. I didn't give her a hollow thank you. I just wrapped it around my neck and leaned my head gently on her shoulder. Uncle Robert pulled a small box from under the table. Go ahead. Nothing fancy. Inside was an old fountain pen, the kind with a name engraved on the cap. My name. I laughed. You think I'm gonna write so many letters I need my own pen? No, he said. I think someone who writes as well as you deserves a pen that matches. I held the pen in my hand for a long time. That night I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking up at the California sky. No snow, but full of stars. Inside, Aunt Emily and Uncle Robert were still cleaning up. The clinking of dishes and silverware drifted out like background music, one I'd never heard in the place I used to call home. And I thought, maybe this is what peace feels like. Not loud, not scrutinized, not silent out of obligation. Just presence. Without conditions, without proof. I didn't feel like I had abandoned my family, the way my mother wrote in her final letter. I hadn't turned my back. I'd simply turned away. Chose a place where someone waits for me to come home. Chose love that doesn't need to be explained, that doesn't demand perfection, that doesn't ask me to shrink to fit into someone else's frame. But still, on quiet, windless nights like this, I sometimes wonder, did I do the right thing? Was standing up in the middle of that dinner and handing over the envelope the fair choice? Maybe I could have done it quietly. Mailed the gift. Let things drift away like the crack never happened. But if I stayed silent, who would break the performance that lasted 34 years? If I disappeared in the dark, would they ever stop to notice the light they'd ignored? I didn't do it to humiliate anyone, not to get revenge, as my mother claimed. I did it so I wouldn't have to live as an invisible daughter anymore. And if someone calls that betrayal, then I'd rather betray those expectations than betray myself. I stayed on that porch until the lights inside began to dim. Uncle Robert stepped out and draped a coat over my shoulders. It's late, you should get some sleep. I nodded, pulling the scarf tighter, looking at him. Do you ever regret taking me in? He chuckled. Your aunt once said something when you were 16 that I never forgot. You don't have to give birth to a child to call it family. You just have to see them when no one else does. I didn't answer. I just leaned my head on his shoulder, and for the first time in my life, I let myself truly rest. In real life, there are relationships labeled family that force us to shrink ourselves just to be accepted. Rose's story is a reminder that real love isn't born from obligation or blood, but from quiet presence and unconditional care. When we draw boundaries, release old expectations, and stay with those who truly see our worth, that's not abandoning family. That's the first step toward building a real one. Peace always begins with a brave choice. Do you think Rose made the right decision by speaking her truth publicly? Or should she have walked away quietly? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, healing, and the choices that shape us.